Thank you so much for joining us on a Friday of the Ask You conference. We're delighted to see you. Our job today is actually to talk about this provocative title, Funding the New Normal. And we have assembled a stellar cast of characters to talk about this and really bring some insight to these questions. So my name is Kim Middleton. I am an academic strategy consultant at ACU, the Association of College and University Educators. We're an organization that is dedicated to student success through exceptional teaching, and we have had the great pleasure of working with the panelists today. I'm going to back up and let them actually introduce themselves so you get a sense of what they do and where they do it, and then we will jump into a great conversation for you today. I think April has agreed to start us off. Go ahead, April.
Hello, I am April Don, the lead senior instructional designer and faculty development consultant in the Center for the Advancement of Faculty Excellence, better known as CAFE, at the California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. We are part of the 23 campus California State University system, and I am also a facilitator for AQ's open enrollment micro-credential courses.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Charles McAdams. I'm the retired provost and vice president for academic affairs at Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi. And because I'm retired, you never know what I might say. So just fair warning. Anyway, happy to be here with you this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Diana Rogers-Atkinson, provost and senior vice president for academic affairs at Bloomsburg University, a part of the 14 university PASHE system.
Good afternoon, folks. Farhad Asghar, I'm the program officer for Pathways to Post-Secondary Success at Carnegie Corporation of New York and a proud supporter of AQ. Happy to be here.
So you see what I mean about having assembled quite a powerhouse of folks to talk with us today. So we really did want to think in collaboration with all of you about how we wrestle with this never-ending question at colleges and universities. When we know what's important, how do we fund it, especially when there are so many competing priorities? So we wanted to really start with that question for our panelists. How do you approach this question of funding, particularly in such tight constraints of the last few years, and also how you understand and align and focus on those priorities? So Charles very graciously had agreed to kind of give us some frame of how to think about that.
Sure. Well, we've all heard the expression, no money, no mission, right? Well, when I started at Delta State 7.5 years ago, it was clear that increasing graduation rates was a strategic priority. And in order for us to achieve that, we were going to have some money to help us with that. And, you know, expenditures demonstrate university values. It's not so much what you say, it's what you do as an institution. And what a university spends its money on ultimately is a reflection of the values of the decision makers. And so you have to use that to your advantage. If that is if improving graduation rates is a strategic priority, then you're going to have some resources for that. For research challenged institutions, faculty development requires both internal and external funding. Now, it was hardly a more resource challenged university, certainly in Mississippi, than Delta State. By many different measures, Mississippi is the poorest state in the country, and the Delta region is the poorest region in the state. And so with so many of our students coming from the Delta, we had funding problems with a bit of declining enrollment, and our state support had really declined, and yet expenditures were increasing. We had some significant funding issues ahead of us. But when we look at internal funding, it really is a tale of two buckets of money, right? Student success centers tend to have some money historically, at least some funding, while faculty support, faculty centers for teaching and learning, there may be some funds for salaries, but there are usually not sufficient funds for operations, especially for things such as AQs, effective teaching practices, and those kinds of support that faculty need for teaching. So we really have to fight the battle for student success on two fronts: student academic assistance and faculty development. We have to fund both of those if we're going to have student success. So what did we do at Delta State? I was able to use some internal funding. We didn't have a lot, but then, as you'll see on the next slide, what we did was combined those university funds with private foundations, and we were able to identify a private foundation in Mississippi that was concerned about increasing graduation rates. And I was able to tie together that adage that the main ingredient for student success is good teaching. And in order to do that, we had to have additional funds for a teaching center that would focus on projects such as the effective teaching practices and other things to help improve teaching. There's also an opportunity with corporate foundations and partnerships, because corporations they need our graduates, and they need our graduates with the skills to make them good employees. And those skills are going to come from good teaching. And there's also the opportunity for individual donors. So from that standpoint, it's a combination of the university funds, private foundations, and corporate foundations for many institutions that are like Delta State that are resource challenged. So that was sort of the Delta State story in trying to look for funding to help us with that.
Thanks, Charles. I really, those two buckets really bring it home, right? And the necessity of sort of combining funding streams. Diana, tell us a story about Bloomsburg and how you kind of come at these questions of funding and priorities.
And so for Bloomsburg, one of the first issues that we were facing is, especially given the pandemic, was we had historically had a very face-to-face traditional format for instruction on our campus. And so we knew that we would have a real challenge as we were pivoting in making sure that we had equal quality as we were moving into a pivoted online campus, and knew that we were going to have to make sure that we kept students at the forefront of that, because we needed our students to be having a really effective experience. And how were we going to best really upskill a lot of our faculty in an effective way, which really is what brought us to AQ. For us, we ended up redirecting a lot of our internal resources that historically would have been spent on a lot of other things, external conferences, other opportunities that normally we were using to support our faculty and faculty development. But given the pandemic, a lot of those were either costing us an awful lot less, because the nice part about a remote conference is it's an awful lot less with no travel. And so we redirected a lot of our resources from our academic enhancement fund to then be able to fund faculty to participate in the cohorts. And so we were able to launch 2 cohorts with about 66 faculty that could then go through this advanced professional development and training. And so for us, that was I guess, a silver lining of the pandemic, is it allowed us to tap into internal resources and use them in another way. Our next really big challenge, though, anybody who's been reading Inside Higher Ed the past couple of weeks may have heard that Bloomsburg University has been voted to, by our Board of Governors, merge with Lock Haven and Mansfield University in the PASHE system and become one institution. So we will be partnering soon with 2 other institutions that have budgeted differently, and also, as indicated in the media, they've had some financial issues at those 2 institutions. And so now our challenge will be, how do we sustain and actually grow the training to our new collaborators on our other 2 campuses, to make sure all the faculty are equally provided similar opportunities, and how are we going to be able to resource that? So the internal question might become a little bit different as we have to also integrate with 2 other institutions.
Yeah, I really appreciate sort of your focus right on this is what worked and then anticipating what comes next. I mean, when we look at these incredibly fluid and flexible budget situations, it is that sort of dual sight, I think, that we're all employing. April, please tell us the story at Cal Poly Pomona.
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about 2019, 2020, and 2021. At Cal Poly Pomona, our partnership with AQ began in 2019. The initial cohort was comprised at least partially of faculty teaching high fail rate DFW courses or high equity gap courses, which tend to occur in our STEM disciplines. So the goal was really to support the adoption of the classroom practices that result in student success without reducing expectations of performance for those courses. They're genuinely difficult. The courses are tough to teach because it's hard to sustain, motivation in the face of student failure, disappointment, even blame. So the research-based effective instructional strategies, they really begin to change this frustrating dynamic because more effective instruction it leads to more effective student effort. And because of its community building outcomes, AQ really gave our faculty the opportunity to focus on the systemic, multifaceted, long-term problems in these courses. So we offered effective teaching practices with funding in 2019, generously provided by the Office of Student Success. But it was one-time Chancellor's Office funding. It allowed us to give $1,000 stipends to our faculty who completed the course. And they were facilitated, these courses, by our director of CAFE, a faculty fellow, and then myself. In 2020, again in collaboration with the Office of Student Success, we were able to fund a second year of AQ. And this cohort we had 33 faculty in it, and we had one of those previous we had it facilitated by one of those previous faculty who had been in the cohort. And their role was really crucial because for our team, we all know March of 2020, COVID closed the physical campus and we were all remote teaching. And having AQ in the capable hands of a faculty facilitator was one of our best investments. Come summer, our provost wanted faculty to have training. And so we used the CARES Act funding source to create a summer institute on course redesign for an online inclusive polytechnic education. And with that, we were able to have 5 micro-credential AQ courses, and our faculty actually received $1,500 stipends. And we had it facilitated again by faculty. And but it was really our provost in collaboration with the associate provost who were really extremely supportive of getting training for our faculty at that recommended level of stipends. And this year, our campus has continued to be committed. And we've actually used, Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And we were able to bring AQ to our campus once again for our summer 2021 offerings. And, really the past 3 years summarized, though, would be that our campus administration, it's been incredibly supportive in recognizing the importance of the training of our faculty and what they receive through AQ. So the investment is directly in faculty as a priority towards achieving student success. And our next steps are to find sustainable funding moving forward. We've used 3 different funding models now, and we now have a new provost as of a week or 2 ago. And so we'll be making sure that she knows the value of AQ.
Thanks, April. I feel like there is a real story here. Charles started out with 2 buckets, and now I think we're talking about multiple buckets that all kind of, I'm losing the metaphor, but are all kind of pointing back at this key, connection, I give up, between student success and faculty development, right? So Farhad, if you would tell, your perspective is a little different, right? So maybe it's more about the strengths that you're seeing from the people who are talking with you at Carnegie.
Sure. I think April, Diana, and Charles kind of framed it perfectly, right? I think before I go too deep into reflecting on the story, I just want to acknowledge that philanthropy kind of gets in the way as well, right? We often generate some of the barriers that we're all working to address, and this is a unique time for us in the philanthropic field to authentically investigate these opportunities that we have to work together. And what you've heard from Diana, April, and Charles are the creative ways higher ed is responding to these crises and really filling these buckets up, these various buckets up, right? And philanthropy's role is really, if we're going to be honest, three things we can do. We can invest in this innovation that you're hearing that AQ engenders. We can create visibility and for and connection between grantees and other folks doing the work. And then lastly, as the CARES Act and the stimulus funding is showing us, push on the policy side where the real resources are. So coming full circle, these are the stories that I think philanthropists need to hear. Ultimately, I think recognizing that your strength is your work, right? Your expertise, your deep connections to the communities you serve as higher ed institutions, whether it's as researcher role or a practitioner role, and leveraging those existing relationships is a huge asset because, as you know, you have power as the folks doing the work who understand the needs of their community, whereas obviously funders have the power because they have the resources. But the assumptions that we often make is that we know what's going on. Quite often, this is changing. It's getting better, thankfully. But don't ever assume that if you're getting resources from Foundation A and Foundation B that they know they're both funding you. So be that authentic connector, not just within higher ed, but also within the philanthropic community. It's a powerful opportunity to connect your existing supporters around the scope of this work. And so ultimately, these stories, these opportunities allow the funders to connect with each other. The burden is on us to really be thoughtful and get these information, but understand that your knowledge of the solutions are incredible for your program officer to know about. And don't be as shy, as Charles pointed out, of sharing the success and asking for those connections as well.
Thank you. Whoops. And I also want to encourage you, for those of you who are with us, please feel free to store up some of your questions in the chat. We'll make sure we leave some time at the end to talk through them. So if something is occurring to you as you're listening to the wisdom pour forth from our panelists, please go ahead and shove that in the chat. So I think Farhad had sort of wrapped up some of these questions by thinking about sort of connections and then these success stories. So I think one of the questions I wanted to pose to you all was really around that question of success, and specifically metrics or data or outcomes. Like what is the role of those kinds of reportage for the work that you all are doing? And maybe Diana would be willing to start.
And so, I think every provost knows data rules pretty much on our campuses. I don't know a strategic plan that doesn't have to have data-based decision-making that then links that back into our spending and our outcomes. And so that was really critical, both when we were proposing to move resources that have previously been committed in one area into another and show where we believe we would be seeing positive outcomes to the students, both in terms of student retention, in terms of improved quality instruction, especially given such an unusual time in higher education, being able to demonstrate that we were still maintaining a similar retention rate of our students to pre-pandemic was pretty critical in showing that these outcomes were effective. But there was also a qualitative aspect, and that really kind of goes back to our faculty. As the peer groups working through and making changes, were illustrating those, sharing them with their peers, and then getting affirmation from their own students. Wow, that was really cool. I liked how you tried and changed that, and it's really helping me do better as a student. Those qualitative stories also really help with this process. So I really see it as making sure that we don't lose everything just in the numbers, but also in the student lived experience as they see improved pedagogy in our classrooms, and it makes them want to stick around, stay, and be successful.
I saw Farhad give us a little thumbs up over there, and I couldn't agree more, right? I mean, I think anybody at AQ will tell you, how gratified and impressed we are by the data that has come out. I think Angelica shared one of the stories of Delta, of Charles's institution, Delta, in the chat. And, we need that quantitative data, but you're exactly right, Diana. I think really one of those things we really lean into are hearing about the changes that faculty are making for students, and also that cycle of how it sort of really helps fill faculty back up. We know this has been such a year for them, right? I mean, burnout is not just real, it is everywhere. So when they get that kind of positive reinforcement feedback from their students, I think it is hugely important to the story about data, if you will. And next, sorry, jump in here. Is it April? Sorry.
So AQ, it really gathers, rigorous assessment data for the teaching practice change and the student achievement and provides it to the campus. So, we have that data there, but we've really continued to do AQ because the faculty like it, they're benefiting from it. And, we've not done a rigorous assessment of the program on our campus to date. Between the faculty credential program and the micro credentials, we've had hundreds of faculty complete the AQ training, and we're continuing, even in this summer, as you mentioned, burnout, during this summer, we're continuing to fill all of our sections of workshops and professional development offerings that we're making available to faculty. So that's kind of the Cal Poly Pomona point of view at this point.
No, the story about faculty is strong, right, across all of these institutions. Charles, please jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and thanks to Angelica for putting up the item about the data that we had from Delta State. But as a postscript to that, we have had a huge improvement in the reduction of our gateway courses with a D or F or W. And April was talking about that being a goal at her institution. And these things are directly tied to what we've been doing with our AQ partnership. The other thing is that when you have data like this, it is so important, as you all know, to shout that from the mountaintop, because that can only help to maintain or increase your institutional support. And it is vital to show those corporate or private foundations that to show what success you've had, because success breeds success, right? Foundations will want to support something, invest in you when they see you are having success. And so use the data for that. And it's a great way to get support for the AQ program.
Farhad, jump in.
Sure, I think everyone has nailed it, right? In terms of the kind of like not letting the pendulum swing too far into just pure data or pure anecdotes. I think it's important to tell the stories exactly as Charles, April, and Diana said. And specifically, I think one of the larger points I want to make, and it'll feel like I'm pandering to the higher education universe here. I'm just being very earnest here that we need a powerful counter narrative right now, especially with all the hits that higher ed takes in the media. Some of it deserve it. We will all agree. But there's so many other stories about faculty raising their hands to learn, to connect, to try new techniques, build stronger core models of it, should be there for their students ultimately in ways that we just don't hear about, whether we're talking about the general public or the foundation world, right? So the data to counteract these attacks on higher ed and using that as part of the conversation is amazing. Just quick anecdote, so when AQ came into my life, just looking at the data, this is great. My first question is, what are you doing with a big public institution like CUNY? And so we supported a small pilot, which is very successful, a move to phase 2, and then the pandemic hit, and we were immediately able to work with AQ and CUNY. Actually, AQ and CUNY did all the work to pivot to an online teaching and learning model, to do the micro-credential, to reach faculty in every community college in CUNY, ultimately expecting to reach about 80,000 students, which is a no-brainer for us. And it happened because AQ did such a great job communicating the success, the struggles, the difficulties, the challenges, and the beautiful kind of collaborative partnerships that happen here. So yes, just wanted to share that.
We'll take it. I really, as an English person, I feel like this emphasis on storytelling, right? How we tell our story, what the story is just sort of resonating deeply. And from internally, the strength of that in a moment when we need, right, just sort of emotionally good stories, but then also the necessity of telling that story outward. I think, Charles and Farhad, you guys are onto something in the sense that it's easy to kind of hide our light under a bushel sometimes, right? Like, oh, we're doing good work, but in this little corner, when so much good work is going on. And boy, do we need some positive stories in higher ed right now. Speaking of sort of a difficult moment and telling some good stories, we are sort of emerging out of COVID. We are, I guess I should say, we're in the next phase of COVID. And I'm wondering if y'all could talk a little bit about, the impact that you are observing, whether we have achieved something as we are moving into this next phase, and what you think is worth sustaining as we go forward. April, I think you had volunteered to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Pre-COVID, our team, we had some amazing programs, but we were always trying to market ourselves. We had the regulars, those fabulous faculty, who come to all of our events. They're really evangelists for the work we do. But we were always wanting some, more of the campus population to recognize us and use our services. So really trying to get our name out there. And then COVID happened. During COVID, as I'm sure happened to so many of you at your own institutions, our team took on the enormous task of getting the entire campus teaching remotely using our Blackboard learning management system. We're a team of 9 staff, a mix of instructional designers, multimedia developers, instructional technology consultant, admin coordinator, director, and student assistants. And we were quick, to have those resources necessary for remote teaching during a pandemic. And we continued at this heightened pace the entire year. But summer did not give us time to breathe as we ramped up for our professional development offering, as I mentioned earlier. All of our normally in-person trainings and programs, for example, we have an engaging the digital student initiative. Normally it's a week-long face-to-face experience. Now, last year and this year, it became a 4-week online, online institute. And we have a Champions of Accessibility and Inclusivity program with faculty champions from our 8 colleges who teach in the college, their workshops. This past year, we still had the program, but all through Zoom, which became a household word. Then after getting the entire campus up and running on Blackboard, our campus decided to change to Canvas. Yep. In the midst of the pandemic, we have spent 2021 transitioning our campus for a fall completely on Canvas. The impact of COVID, it brought our department's resources through training, programming, and support into everyone's home office. And cafe became part of everyone's vocabulary, but the level of workload, is not sustainable. And as we're hoping to see and feel a break as the fall semester begins, having a new LMS just begins, we anticipate not having a break coming anytime soon. But as for AQ, people are talking about AQ. It's now a word that on campus, faculty recognize it, administration recognizes it, and it really has improved strategies and techniques that among many of the faculty at Cal Poly Pomona, at least.
Thanks, April. And Farhad, do you want to talk a little bit about where all of this sort of fits in from your perspective?
Absolutely. I think April, Charles, and Diane have hit the nails on the head several times here. That was the round of applause I was doing, not the raising my hand sign. Sorry. The word for me is the transparency. Like you can see what's happening we were talking about this earlier in our prep call. You can just see into everyone's living room, right? So the transparency that exists now exists in terms of collaboration amongst funders and between faculty and practitioners, between practitioners and funders as well, and which sustains the way that we think and new ways to innovate. So getting rid of as many silos as possible, being as transparent and vulnerable with each other as possible, with the importance of recognizing the real burnout that's existing in education, but in social services in general, is real. But what is fantastic is the walls just coming down. And I just hope we don't go back to a world where Charles and I and April and Diana and Kim and all of us can just maintain these connections and just be authentic human beings with each other as we're trying to solve real problems for the young people we're serving. So my answer is just I'm really enjoying the transparency and the bringing down of silos.
Thank you. So yeah, so April is telling a story really right about this like marathon of running, but I do think that notion that you bring up, Farhad, about vulnerability is like written all over April's story, both of her team and the faculty, right? Transparency amongst all of these various silos. Diana, you started out with a challenge that's sort of like in your sights. What have you learned? What do you think is worth sustaining as we go forward?
So, as I mentioned, we have this opportunity right now to actually rebuild an entire new institution from the ground up. And so that's how one of our students who's on the Board of Governors said, here, what an amazing opportunity. And so how we think about our pedagogical practices as a rebuilt new institution of three becoming one is really the grand opportunity here, and making sure that we're sustaining this process and this project that we began with AQ, and it'll tie to a lot of our system initiatives, which is what I'm hoping will help us have resources around that, because developmental education and how we've been rebuilding that across the system is a paramount. We know to better serve all three campuses as one institution, we have to do a lot of high flex in some of our courses and our programs, because really part of BU being involved in this is to help bring more programs to the campuses that didn't have those opportunities, and expand the reach of the footprint for students across a lot of different majors. And so this is one of our tools that we really need in the toolbox to help faculty really think about what do they want the pedagogy to look like for this new triad of campuses.
You have utterly convinced me that this is an opportunity. I sort of was sold on the story of challenge, and now I'm like, this is a great frame. Charles, please jump in.
Well, I think there are two things coming out of the pandemic. One is that clearly we've all been jettisoned out of our comfort zone, and faculty have been seeking assistance through their Centers for Teaching and Learning, as April talked about, in numbers that they had previously not done. But I think one of the outcomes is that in the inevitable search for a new normal, faculty will welcome and seek out courses like the AQ Effective Teaching Practices and other workshops from their home Centers for Teaching and Learning to help them. I think they are seeing the value of that. And the second thing is, I think we all learned that students like the flexibility that we gave them in some instances of online synchronous, high flex, all of these different kinds of things that we were doing. And so the pandemic showed us that flexibility in some of these new modes of instruction is the right thing to do. But as we know, it's not enough to do the right thing. You have to do the right thing the right way. And AQ's effective teaching practices, their micro credentials, help us to make sure that we're doing these things the right way.
That is a takeaway for sure. Do the right thing, but do it in the right way. I will say, just from talking with faculty this year, one of the stories that I keep hearing is exactly that, this deep desire to do right by your students. And then the real question of, how do I do that? What does it look like? And so a lot of the feedback that I've been getting, just, anecdotally, is around that question. Like, I used this practice from the course and this is what was useful. So again, very gratifying to hear. To the people in the audience, I have one final question for the panelists, but I also want to make sure that we have time to answer some of your questions. So I'm hoping that you will take a second if there's anything interesting here that you want to follow up on, if you want to hear more about a particular institution or project or pose a question. I want to make sure that you feel pretty welcomed to do that. So feel free to drop it in the chat if there is something that is on your mind and burning or popping, maybe is a better metaphor. And then while you're thinking through those questions, I'm going to pose, right, a terrible question for anybody who's in the academic space, right? I'm going to ask our panelists to be succinct and give us a takeaway. I know, right? Like Charles already, right? We're going to see all the screens go black and people are going to flee. But I am wondering, right, here as we are, nearing the end of the Ask You conference, as we are sort of hurtling toward the fall semester, if there is one takeaway that you want to make sure that this group hears, what would it be? What is it we need to know about funding in the new normal and thinking about the primacy of faculty development and student success and excellent teaching? Is there a sort of single takeaway that you want us to focus on? I see that Diana has her mic off, which means she's ready to go. It's amazing. Please.
If you get out of the gate first, then you don't have to think too long. But, really, I think it's let your faculty tell your stories with your funders. The more that they tell you they believe in what they've learned, what they're doing, and showing their impact, it's a lot easier to convince other people. When it's just me trying to ask for money, there's always could be a hidden agenda assumed because you're the provost. And so that's my takeaway. Let them be your power.
That's a great takeaway. Charles, you also look unmuted. That's promising.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that the key really is to persevere. Don't give up in your quest to find operational funding for your centers to fund programs like the effective teaching practices, because more universities than ever are recognizing that the key ingredient to student success is good teaching. And so as we come out of the pandemic, focus on that, persevere in your efforts.
Okay. Perseverance and let the faculty's stories be your power. It looks like, okay, April. Oh, April, are you ready to go? We have a question, but go ahead. And then we'll.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say that this year, I know personally, I found out my strengths through the Clifton Strengths because I'm on an NSF program, and using your strengths to make a lot of this happen also. For me, it's achiever and strategic and futuristic. And I know that I pull from all of those as we're trying to find funding, as we're trying to be creative in our program development, and, really trying to make that difference for the faculty that results in our student success. And just our last thought is just, this past year, it's been tough. Work was tough, family was tough, life happens, and just being grateful for everything that we do have. I know I lost my father during this year, and brother-in-law to COVID. So there's really, there's a lot though that we have to be grateful for. So that's kind of moving forward for us.
Oh, April, I'm so sorry to hear that. Thanks for reminding us of the importance of gratitude. Farhad, please.
Really quickly, actually, April set me up really nicely. Forgive me for that. Just the strength is your strength is in your work, your expertise and deep connections, right? Like I think let's not forget that Charles, Diana, April have given us amazingly beautiful examples of the power of the work and being confident in that power as practitioners. The power dynamics are the power dynamics, and anyone will completely agree that the strength is in the work and in the power of the relationships that you have with campuses.
Thanks, Farhad. What a lovely way to wrap that up. All right, hold on to all these last words of wisdom. We are going to turn to some questions. And if you look in the chat, you'll see that Rick has posted one. And Rick, I'm like scanning. If you want to talk through your own question, you're welcome to unmute and go ahead and do that.
Yeah, sure. And I'll be real quick here. It's good to see everybody on the panel. And so thank you so much. I think, a lot of institutions are like us. We're searching for the solutions or the answers or, the resolution to help us through all kinds of things. And so every day we have people coming at us trying to sell us something, right? And so picking through all that is part of the task. And so I just wonder if a couple of panelists would kind of talk through like, well, this seemed to be the evidence, consultant arrangement that would be the right fit for our institution. So thank you for that.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll jump in so I can say hello to my old friend Rick Sluter. Didn't know I was going to see you today, but it's good to see you, Rick. That's a great question because we are inundated with unsolicited emails, phone calls that hopefully your office assistant can stop. And it can just be overwhelming. And Rick, what made the difference for me was two things. One, I saw examples of the effective teaching practices course, and not just a quick snippet, but for about 20 minutes, I got into some meat of the courses. And then I heard other testimonials, if you will, from other institutions that had used this. And Delta State partnered with AQ, gosh, I think it's been 4 years ago now. And it is because I saw how impactful those courses were. And I heard from many others and many institutions that signed on to this. So ultimately, and in those 4 years, even more universities have signed on and doing this. And at the end of the day, if that many schools are using it and getting the results we talked about at the data, to me, that just says that's a good product. Doesn't mean that there aren't other things out there that can have impact, but we have benefited greatly at Delta State, and other institutions in Mississippi have too, with the partnership with AQ.
You know, and for Bloom, one of the issues that came forward was our Tail Center brought us to this table. So the director of that, Lisa, test drove a variety of different opportunities out there. So, you know, all those different vendors. So she took a variety of the different courses, including AQs. And in the end, she basically said they won. You know, that was the experience that she felt what brought the most to the table, and that could really expand the most horizons for our faculty.
Thanks to you both. The question comes via vis-a-vis the back end, so I'm not sure who it belongs to. If this is your question and you want to claim it, please feel free. But I'm going to read it exactly as I have it here. For those institutional leaders who've engaged with AQ, what next step or advanced needs or challenges has it helped uncover? It's a really interesting question.
Well, I'll jump in and say that one of the items that we had to deal with was what incentives do we have for faculty to participate? And I think we learned that we have to find a way to incentivize faculty without breaking the bank. And again, we're not a large institution, and that was a concern, and of course, because of our funding. But at a school, again, Rick, the size of Mitsu, boy, you having a $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 stipend for the number of faculty and adjuncts that you have could be incredible. So I think that is something that each institution, based on the community there, has to figure out how you motivate and how you incentivize faculty to participate.
Kim, I was just wondering if I could just jump in really quickly and just from a different perspective, right? The perspective of a funder. My appreciation and love for AQ comes from, to answer Rick's initial question, comes from the data that they had, right? The way Diana talked about it. So Penny McCormack and Jonathan Gerko came in and shared like years of real research and data that showed the efficacy and the impact, not just on faculty, but also on students, right? So that is great. And in terms of next steps, to the question that was asked in the chat, sorry, in the back end, for us is again, how do we continue in a brass tacks pragmatic way create efficiencies in higher education for the students? It all comes down to obviously the successful training and education of the young people that come to the institutions that are represented on this call. And AQ has solutions, products, processes that work, simply put, and where they don't, they'll own it and work with you to create those efficiencies. So that's, for me, a very simple kind of lens of like, all right, how is it helping the institutions and the students that participate today, tomorrow, and next year?
Thanks, Farhad. April, I thought I saw your thing go. Please.
Yes. And just to kind of echo that, our department and the campus, we had really done all of the student success strategies that did not involve classroom work, and that's really what AQ supplies. So, you know, we had done institutes and quality matters and just lots of other programs, for the faculty, which we still are developed, which we still bring to the campus and are available to our faculty. But having AQ is that missing component that now kind of really paints that whole picture for us. So that's what we really appreciate about AQ.
I'm going to pose one as we're sort of, approaching the end of our time here. There was one, oops, and am I missing somebody? Oh, hooray. Thanks, Rick. That's good to know. Your faculty member will thank you. I hope. I wanted to just add one additional thing from the back end, and it's asking specifically, it's a little bit related to this question that you all just answered, right, about sort of next steps, but it's specifically faculty oriented. And I think what I'm reading is what, if any, particular engagements or needs have resonated the most with faculty? So to April, and maybe to Charles's point as well, right? What is it we're seeing when you are instituting AQ that might most appeal to faculty, specifically at institutions too, that are looking at a broad range of incentives in a moment when faculty are overloaded as well. So things that pop off the top of your head about needs or particular engagements that have resonated the most with faculty who are engaged with AQ.
For our campus, the faculty talk about the peer-to-peer support, because they are in a cohort. And so that interaction and talking through and test driving things together so that they aren't, just kind of out on their own trying these ideas and exploring their pedagogy has been critical. For us, we aren't incentivizing. We had the reverse problem. Our first line in the budget, we were only going to fund one cohort, but we had enough people asked to that meant we needed to do 2 cohorts, and we didn't want to turn people away. And so that's a good problem to have, but also something to be prepared for too, that you may not need to incentivize it. They might just decide to be excited about it and come.
What I really hear from faculty is also the community. They just, being in an AQ environment and the community that builds from the course launch through all of the observe and analyze discussions that they have for each module, all the way to the end when they have their summary discussion. It's that community that's woven through that our faculty really appreciate. Being a facilitator, seeing the engagement that happens during those discussions is really one of kind of the AQ powerhouse really for our faculty.
Thanks to you both for saying that. I think that is something that we have heard, we hear every year, but really heard this last year, right? That it was when people were so disparate and so taxed, that being able to talk with each other, to share strategies, to work through problems together with the course as a kind of foundation for that has sort of seeded, to Farhad's earlier point, right? Some of that de-siloing of faculty using the same kind of language. It looks like we are coming to the end of our time. If you're like me, you've seen a pop-up about a session survey. I know ASCII would appreciate some information from you about what you got out of this session. If you have follow-up questions about AQ or about any of the projects and terrific work that are going on at these various institutions, I would encourage you to get in touch with us, and we are happy to send information back and forth. Thank you so much, Colleen. Anything else from our panelists other than a huge round of applause for them coming? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anything I'm missing, folks, that you want to get in before we close out the session?
Thanks for coming today.
Exactly.
Thanks, Rick.
Wonderful. Have a wonderful Friday, you all. Thanks again. We appreciated having your time this afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.